Welcome everybody to our lesson on giving examples. And the reason I chose this topic today is because in every IELTS lesson, in every IELTS essay, you are required to write examples. Now here we have a sample IELTS essay question, and you're probably all familiar with the questions that appear in IELTS. And here we've got, on the top part here, we've got the topic. So the topic here, the best way to reduce crime is to give longer prison sentences. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Oops, what have I done? Okay. Now on the bottom here in blue, we've got give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experience. This is standard for all IELTS essay questions, whether they're general or academic, it's standard. So you must include reasons and you must include examples. And so in today's lesson, that's what we'll be looking at. And we're going to be looking at the common problems with giving examples and how to avoid them. Okay, so common problems include personal examples, fake examples, incorrect position of examples, and incorrect punctuation. So I'm sure that many of you can relate to these. I get a lot of students who ask me questions. Can I make up examples? What about commas? Where do we put commas? Can I put in personal examples? So I thought maybe it would be a good idea to put these all together and have a short lesson about them. So we're going to start with personal examples. And personal examples are examples of when you talk about yourself, your family, your friends, or your pets, okay? And these are actually not a good idea. It's not a good idea to use personal examples in your essays. And the reason is because the essay is more formal, it's more academic, it's not a letter to a friend or anything like that. So they expect you they expect it to be a bit impersonal. Okay, here we've got a sentence taken from a short paragraph. We've got young children in many developing countries are often exposed to substantial amounts of screen time. Now I want you to consider yourself as the examiners, all right? And I want you to look at these two examples that are coming up. They're examples for this specific sentence, okay? And tell me, as an examiner, which one would you prefer? You can just put it in the chat box. Is it 1 or 2? Okay, so everybody, well, most people have written 2. Why? Why is it 2? Exactly. Okay, so we want to distance ourselves. Okay, this is not, yes, that's more general. The first one is personal, and we want to distance ourselves. Okay, okay, very good. All right, so now we're going to move on. Okay. Now, this is an example that I took from the homework you guys did last week. And this is an example that one of you put in about studying abroad. Okay, I would like you just to take a few seconds to read it first. All right, so is it a personal example or a general example here? Yes, it's very obvious that this is a personal example. Okay, now the first thing I'd like to mention is that we don't start examples with personally. Okay, we're going to look at how to start examples. We can use for example, we can use to illustrate, okay, but we can't use personally, because personally is used to introduce opinion, and this is not an opinion. Okay. Now, the other thing I want you to notice is the number of words. This is 44 words. just to give one example. Now you might think that's great, it's very difficult for me to reach 250 or 300 words, so the more words I write, the better. But no, you want to use your words well. You want to be able to say the same thing in fewer words so that you can develop your answer more and expand your answer more. Okay, let's look at the improved version. Okay, so here we have, for example, many students who study abroad learn new things, become more independent, and make friends from all over the world. This is saying the exact same thing, but in half the number of words. We're not saying this, the first one sounds like you're speaking to somebody. Oh, a friend of mine, he told me that, and da 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 da. So it doesn't sound very formal. Okay, too personal. All right. Okay. Now we're going to look at invented examples. What do you think invented examples mean? You can just put them in the chat box. Yes, made up ones, invented ones, fake statistics, fake research, okay? Something you make up during the exam, yes, not real. Excellent answers. Okay, good. Now, the IELTS essay is an opinion-based essay. You'll always be asked to give your opinion and justify it and give reasons. It's not a research-based essays. Now, research-based essays are usually given at universities, and you're given time, a few weeks, sometimes a few months. You have access to books, references, resources. But the examiners know that you don't have access to books, you don't have access to resources, and you only have 40 minutes. So they don't expect you to include any kind of research studies where you mention dates or names of universities and things like, or percentages. Most people don't remember percentages when they read research. They don't remember the names of the universities that conducted the research. So it doesn't sound very believable. And we've got an example here of fake research. And although it is believable, the examiner is going to think that the examiner is going to know that you've made this up. So a study by Hopkins University in 2013 found that 81% of single working mothers do not spend enough time taking care of their own well-being. I think most of you would agree with that, okay? But the examiner is going to know that this is fake. I'm not saying that it will affect your score, but that's not what they want. So why don't we give them what they want? Okay? So what we could do, we could remove the name of the university, we could remove the date, and we could remove the percentage. Okay? And then we can end up with something like this. And that is just as good without all the fake stuff. All right, agreed? Okay. So here's the IELTS examiner, and the IELTS examiner is marking hundreds of papers and is thinking, the students think I'm not intelligent enough to realize this is invented. They think they can trick me. Now, I can assure you that most examiners don't look as scary as she does, but still, we want to be on their good side. We don't want to annoy them, all right? Okay, so here are two examples, and I'll let you read them. Choose one. You don't need to choose both. Choose one and rewrite it so it doesn't refer to universities, it doesn't refer to years, it doesn't refer to percentages. It's just a bit more general. All right? And type it up in the chat box. Okay, any answers? Okay, so let's look at the answers then. So in the first one, we don't need to mention Oxford University. We can just say research suggests, okay? We don't need to mention this percentage. We can just say significantly, okay? Boost. 65% is a significant number, okay? In this one, that's referring to the Washington Post, and it's got a percentage as well. We don't need to mention those. We can make it very, very simple. We don't even have to mention any kind of research because this is, we could say, well-known information. If you've lived in America or if you know a lot of Americans, then it's quite clear that the majority prefer coffee over tea. Okay, so we don't even need to mention research or any kind of studies. And it could be just a very simple sentence. It doesn't need to be this long sentence with lots of fake information. Okay, so what are some useful expressions that we can use to introduce examples that are related to studies or research? We can use these 6, and there are a lot more. So we can say research has shown that, and I'm just going to use a general example. Research has shown that females make better managers than males. Okay, I'm not sure about that, but I'm just making it up right now. Studies suggest that females make better managers than males. A recent report has revealed that females make better managers than males. Okay. Now there's something I'd like to point out. Actually, there are 2 points I'd like to point out, and they're grammar points. The first one, research is uncountable. So we can't put an A in front of it, and we can't make it plural. So we can't say researches. Okay, that's a very, very common mistake in IELTS essays. And the other point is that we can use present simple or we can use present perfect. So here I could say research has shown, or I can say research shows. They're both accurate. You can choose whatever you like. Okay. All right. Let's just check the chat before we move on to the next point. Okay. All right, reason. Okay, surveys. Yes, you can refer to surveys. You can refer to surveys, you can refer to studies, you can refer to research. Okay, good. Saeed mentioned a recent survey showed. Now, I wouldn't use showed here because you're not giving the year and you said recent, so you would use present perfect. Okay? Okay, good. We're moving on now. We're going to move on to the position of examples. So where do we put examples? And I'd like you to read the sentence and tell me what's wrong with it. You're the examiners. Okay, any ideas? Okay, good. All right, so we've got an answer here. The position of the example is wrong. Why is the position wrong? The example is in the wrong place, but why? Okay, now this is why. We always need to place the example the example should always support the point you make in the sentence directly before it. Here we're talking about city life, and it's more exciting than the countryside. And then we talk, we say younger generation, and then we talk about older people tend to prefer the tranquility of the countryside. This sentence here, sentence number 2, talks about the countryside, but my example talks about the city. So what should happen is we need to flip sentence 2 and sentence 3, like this. So we've got city life is more exciting than the countryside, especially for the younger generation. For example, there are more leisure and entertainment facilities such as cinemas and sports centers in towns and cities. So this example directly supports the sentence just before it. Sentence number 3 talks about the countryside. So it's a different topic. You need to be very careful because when you're writing very quickly in the exam, you might miss something like this. So it's a point to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to look at different ways to introduce examples. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. I did notice that in your homework last week that you did use these. So you've got such as, for example, for instance, a case in point is, a notable example is, or a significant example is. Now in this lesson, because we don't have enough time, we're just going to look at the first 3, and it's fine to use just these. You're okay. That's even in academic, formal, university settings. This is what they use. So it's fine to use just these. These are a bit more advanced. If you know how to use them, that's fine. All right, so we're going to start with using for example. We can use, for instance, for example, to illustrate interchangeably. They have the same meaning and they can be used in the exact same way. They are always used at the start of a sentence. So you start a new sentence with, for instance, for example, or to illustrate. They're not used in the middle of the sentence. So we've got a full stop before it, and then we also have a comma afterwards. Okay. Now, you may see examples where we have, for example, between 2 commas. Yes, that's possible, but it has a different meaning. So I want you to forget that for now. If you're going to put an example, make sure it starts at the beginning. If you're going to use for example, then you need to make sure it starts at the beginning of a sentence. It's followed by a comma and then a complete sentence. And what I mean by complete sentence, you need a subject, you need a verb. Okay? So here we have an example. These days, it is possible to complete a master's degree in a much shorter period of time than before. So this is the point that I'm making, and then it comes the example. For example, and capital letter, of course, and then we have the comma. And this is very important because many students, even at higher levels, get this wrong. They either put a comma here, or sometimes they forget to make this capital letter, or they forget the comma here. So make sure you get this right. For example, in many K universities, most taught master's degree programs run for 1 year full-time or 2 years part-time. Okay? All right. Now, we're going to look at such as. And here we have an example. Countries such as Canada, Switzerland, and Poland have cold climates. What do you notice about such as? How do we use it? Exactly. It's used in the middle of the sentence. It should not be in the beginning. Yes. But even though you know this, you still might make this mistake in the exam because you're rushed. Okay? But so it's important to keep in mind. Okay. So it's never used at the start of the sentence. And the phrases that it introduces can be essential or non-essential. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay. The items in the list. So sometimes we have several items in the list. I can speak English, French, Japanese, and German. Okay. They need to be separated by a comma. as in this example. So we've got Canada, comma, Switzerland. Now here we don't have a comma because we don't need one. Unless you follow the Oxford comma rules, then you would add one. Okay, so now let's look at what we mean by essential and non-essential. Okay, so commas, to be or not to be. So in an essential phrase, the comma is not required. In a non-essential phrase, the comma is required, and we're going to look at some examples. Okay. This first example, food, such as burgers and pizza, are high in calories. Now, if we remove the underlined phrase, the underlined example, does the sentence still make sense, or is the sentence still accurate? Are all foods high in calories? No. So this information is essential to the meaning of the sentence. So we don't put any commas. No commas at all. Now let's look at the next example. Citrus fruits, such as oranges and lemons, are rich in vitamin C. Here we have examples of citrus fruits, but all citrus fruits are rich in vitamin C. So if I remove this, if I remove such as oranges and lemons, I've got citrus fruits are rich in vitamin C. The sentence still makes sense, it's still accurate. So I don't need the commas. Sorry, so I need to put the commas. If you're familiar with relative and non-relative clauses, it's the same rule. Okay. Let's check the chat box here. Questions? Okay, good. Okay. All right, now we've got 4 sentences here. I'd like you to read the sentences and then just type up, are they essential or are they non-essential? So do it for all 4 of them. You can just write the answers for all 4 in the chat. Good. Okay, now these sentences, sorry, I'd like to point out that these sentences are all accurate. There are no problems with commas. I just need you to tell me, is it essential or non-essential? Sorry, maybe I didn't make that clear. Let's do number 1 together. So number 1, traveling abroad involves a great deal of preparation beforehand. Now, if I end it here without the such as, is it still complete? Does it still make sense? Is the meaning all there? Yes. I don't need such as booking tickets and obtaining visas. So this is considered extra information. Okay. So this is non-essential. Very good. Okay, good. It's non-essential because I can leave it out and the sentence would still have all its meaning. All right. What about number 2? Let's do them one at a time. Number 2. Exactly. This is essential. If we remove such as Yemen, in countries, famine is a major problem. That's not accurate. Okay, so I need the such as Yemen there. It must be in there to give a complete meaning, so there are no commas. Good. What about number 3? Excellent. It's not essential. I'm just giving examples of some some first world countries, but the meaning is in all first world countries. children have a tablet. Okay, very good. What about number 4? Great, good, good. Okay, so it is essential because I can't say countries have cold climates. Not all countries have cold climates. Well done, good. Now I know that punctuation, especially commas, can be very, very confusing, and you may see different rules, you may read different rules in books, and they're all accurate. There are different conventions. So as long as you stick to one, that's fine. And I think I'm hoping that this is the simplest one. Okay, good. Okay, now these sentences have punctuation errors. Let's look at number 1. Many secondary school students dream of getting accepted into highly paid fields. For example, medicine, law, and engineering. What's the problem here and how do we fix it? In the chat, please. Okay, what did we say about for example? How do we use for example? We said that for example has to be followed by a comma, and it is, and it has to be followed by a complete sentence. Do we have a complete sentence in number 1? We just have medicine, law, and engineering. We don't. So what should we use here instead? Instead of for example. Exactly. We can use such as. Excellent. Or we could say medicine, law, and engineering are prime examples of such fields, for example. But this is a very common mistake. And like I said, it's not because students don't know, but it's because they're rushing in the exam. But if you're aware of these problems, you're more likely to avoid them in the exam. Okay. It is considered a grammar and a punctuation error. Yes, true. Okay, number 2 now. What's wrong and how do we fix it? Exactly. For example, here is used in the middle of the sentence. It's not starting the sentence. Okay, good, very good. All right, so what we need to use here instead is just such as. Excellent, yes. So foods rich in vitamin C, such as broccoli, oranges, and peppers, can boost the immune system. Okay, all right. What about number 3? The problem is with such as because it's at the beginning of the sentence. Good, okay. All right. Okay, what about number 4 then? This might be a bit tricky. Okay, there's some missing commas just to help you out here. Is this an essential or a non-essential phrase after such as? Yes, thank you, Salha. We need a comma before such as and after YouTube, because we're only giving examples of the popular social media platforms. We're saying the majority of social media platforms are continuously growing in popularity. We don't need that example. Okay, very good. Okay, excellent. These are the answers. Yes. And now that brings us to the end of the session for today. And we've got some do's and don'ts. Okay, so do's. Do use signposts or introductory phrases to signal that an example is coming, like for example, or such as. And do place examples immediately after the argument that they support. So pay attention to the position of the examples, and do use, oh, sorry, that's spelled incorrectly. Do use correct punctuation when giving examples. Don't use personal examples. Don't make up fake studies or fake statistics. Okay. Yeah, that brings us to the end of the lesson, and it gives us a few minutes for questions. So I'll just wait a few seconds or a minute if you have any questions about, specifically about examples, and that's it. Hopefully, if there are no more questions, we will end the session. Okay, no more questions? All right, thank you very much. I hope, we do have a question. Can we write a name of articles like The Guardian? Now, you can. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but IELTS is not expecting you to do it. They know that you don't have access to the newspaper unless you happen to have read it yesterday in The Guardian. But you can. I would just avoid it personally. Because like I said, the examiners will know that it's fake. Is it a good idea to say my own experience is? If it's followed by a general example, if you say my own experience is that working long shifts causes stress or something like that, then it's okay. It's like saying personally. But if it's giving a very specific example about yourself, things that you do or you don't do, things that you like or you don't like, or what your friends or family members do, then I wouldn't include it. I could say my own experience is studying hard gives you better results. That's fine. The phrase itself is okay to use, is just what you put afterwards. Why should we always generalize? An essay is always formal. It's academic in nature. It's not like an article or a letter. Now, articles in journals or magazines can be impersonal. So you can talk to the reader. You can say, have you traveled abroad? Have you done this? Would you like that? So these are personal, but an academic essay is not personal. It's impersonal. So we have to distance ourselves. We have to make some kind of space between us and the reader. Okay? Because this is a feature of academic writing. It's a feature of formal writing. So we don't want to make it personal. We want to also avoid things like you. We want to use personal pronouns like you. The only personal pronoun I would use is I, for example, in an academic essay. Okay? Or they. using numbers to be specific. I would avoid numbers. Instead, I would say, you know, the majority or only a small number of, because who's to say that that number is accurate? In an essay or even an article in a newspaper or a journal, you have to have proof. Now, I read a lot of things on Facebook and they don't make sense to me, and they tell me, oh, 50% of people do this and 50% of people don't do that. Well, where did you get this information from? How am I supposed to believe it? Give me proof. Tell me where this is from. And you can't do that in the IELTS exam. You can't tell the examiner where you got this information from. You can't cite it. You can't say, this is the name of the publisher and this is the date it was published and this is the page number. You can't do that. So what's to say that it's true? So that's why I would avoid them. I'm not saying they will lower your marks. I'm not saying that you're, you know, that it will affect your mark, but it's not what they want you to do. And we want to give IELTS what they want. All right. Why are we requested to pluralize some nouns in essays? Because again, we're speaking in general. Like the lesson that Safwan gave was very good. We talked about, instead of saying a judge and him and her, we would use things like judges. We would speak about people in general. We would make it passive. Passive is also a bit more impersonal. Do we have to have examples in all supporting paragraphs? Okay, this is a question that I get all the time. How many examples should I include in the essay? Okay, now it really depends on how much you write, and you do need to include examples, but there is no specific number. The examiner is not looking for 2 examples or 3 examples or 4, okay? But you do need, I would suggest that you put an example in each body paragraph. 1 example at least. But sometimes 1 example is enough. If you've got explanations, you've got reasons, you've got alternative sentence, sometimes that's enough. We don't need to put more than 1, but 2 is fine. But there isn't a specific number that the examiners are looking for. What the examiners are looking for, convincing argument and a well-developed response. Yes, and you would need to include an example in advantages and disadvantages essays as well. It's a requirement. Okay, thank you all very much for joining us here. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Safwan, for having me again, and I look forward to seeing you in future lessons. Goodbye, and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Amina. Thank you very much.